don't wait on life. Don't wait for life to come to you. Go out, find your purpose in life, live it, because at the end of your life, you'll be a whole lot happier and a whole lot more at peace.
Hi, welcome back to Let Me Ask You Something, the weekly podcast where I, MD Pittman, talk to everyday ordinary people about something extraordinary in their lives. Now, this week I speak with Terry Tucker. He is a motivational speaker, but he's a lot more than that. He's also a person living with cancer and dying from it. So we talk a little bit about his cancer and a little bit about what makes him tick and why he's a motivational speaker with such a dire illness. So here's my interview with Terry Tucker.
Hey, we are live now. Welcome back to Let Me Ask You Something, the weekly podcast where I talk to everyday, ordinary people about something extraordinary that's either happening or has happened in their lives. Today we're talking to Terry Tucker. Terry has led a very interesting life, a very eventful life. Some tragic, some exciting. But first, let me ask you something, Terry. How did you reinvent yourself now?
That's a great question, Mike. Thanks for having me on the show. Really, I reinvented myself more out of necessity than anything else. I've been battling this very rare form of cancer since 2012, and in a sort of Reader's Digest version of it, I kind of break it down into three parts. One was after the surgery, where I ended up being on a drug called interferon every week for almost 5 years, and that drug gave me severe flu-like symptoms after each injection. So imagine having the flu every week for 5 years. That was just to keep the disease at bay. It wasn't a cure or anything like that. And once that was stopped, that was 2017, 2018, I had my left foot amputated. 2019, 2 more surgeries on my shin. And then last year, an undiagnosed tumor in my ankle grew large enough that it fractured my tibia. And April, it gets better. Last April, in the middle of this global pandemic, I had my left leg amputated. Because of the disease. Yeah. So
now, I mean, you grew up as an athlete. You're in a family of athletes. I think I saw a podcast where you were talking about how if you were in church, the people behind you wouldn't like your family very much. 6'5" and above, except for your mom, who was the powerhouse of a 5'7" lady. So how does that affect you? I mean, knowing that you were this active, playing Division I basketball at the Citadel, to where you are now.
You know, it's funny because I had a nurse recently ask me that. She said, what was it like to have your foot amputated and your leg amputated? And I told her, it wasn't easy. Don't get me wrong. I'm still dealing with it. But what I told her was, I am so much more than the sum of my parts. And I remember back to, I think it was 1993 when Jim Valvano at, North Carolina State made that unbelievable speech about, cancer can take all my faculties, but it can't touch my mind, it can't touch my heart, and it can't touch my soul. In 1993, I didn't understand that speech. Today, I do. Yeah. And that's kind of how I feel.
Yeah, just hearing, just mentioning that speech gives me a shiver up my spine because it was that emotional, inspirational. I'll link that in the show notes because everybody needs to watch that speech. Everybody does. Now, you've been a lot of things, reinventing yourself. One thing that drew me when you reached out to me was you were a Cincinnati cop. Now, I'm Cincinnati native here through and through. I live on the west side of Cincinnati. So what was that like? And I don't mean to hop around here, but I just wanted to get to that early.
Yeah, that's fine. That was an interesting time, and I was a policeman in Cincinnati, and very few people remember this because 9/11 happened the same year that one of my classmates who was white, chased a black kid down an alley who had 14 bullets on it.
Distinctly, yes.
Yeah, and shot him and killed him. And the city almost burned down. And I spent 2 weeks working 12-hour days without a break. but I loved it. I worked with great people who were just there to try to make a difference. Mm-hmm. So for me, it was, I got great training. I was on the SWAT team. I was in street corner doing undercover narcotics. I mean, I did all kinds of stuff, and it was my passion.
What led you to that? Because you were a business major in college. What led you to be a cop?
Well, my grandfather was a Chicago police officer from 1924 to 1954. So he was in Chicago during Prohibition, during the Great Depression, during, Al Capone and the gang shooting up the city and stuff like that. And I always wanted to be in law enforcement, but he was also shot in the line of duty with his own gun. It wasn't serious. He was shot in the ankle, but my dad always remembered the knock on the door, he doesn't remember it. My grandmother told the story of the knock on the door. Mrs. Tucker, grab your son. Your husband's been shot. Come with us. Yeah. So my dad had my whole life planned out. You're going to go to college. You're going to major in business. You're going to get a job, get married, have 2.4 kids, live in a house in the suburbs. And that's what my dad wanted. Yeah. And when I graduated from college, he had cancer. And so I didn't want to upset him. So I took my first 2 jobs at Wendy's, the corporate headquarters of Wendy's, and as a hospital administrator.
Up in Columbus, Dublin area,
Yeah, exactly. Doing that. And then when my dad passed away, I became a policeman. And I was a 37-year-old rookie cop. So that's pretty old.
It's kind of like that show, The Rookie.
Yeah, exactly. It is.
Great. So what led you to be a motivational speaker? Because, I mean, a lot of the things that's happened to you, especially in recent years, I mean, that would be a demotivator. I mean, so how did you become a motivational speaker, and what keeps that going?
It's really, as I said, my passion at one point in time was law enforcement. Well, I'm not doing that anymore, obviously. So what is my passion now? What is my purpose? And in all honesty, I am probably coming to the end of my life. I have tumors in my lungs, and they're not going away, and it doesn't look like they're going to go away anytime in the near future. So I wanted to put as much goodness, as much positivity, as much love, as much peace back into the world as I could. And I learned a lot of things being a cop. And one of the things I learned when I was a negotiator was, as a policeman, you're face to face with somebody 99% of the time. And you can see things about them. If they're balling up their fists, they might fight you. If they're, looking around, they might be looking to run. And you can do stuff to mitigate that. But as a negotiator, we weren't with the person. So we had to figure things out based on what people were saying, what they weren't saying, and how they were saying it. And one of the chapters I devoted in my book was a chapter about listening, and not listening to respond, but listening to understand. And I think if we would do a better job of that as a society, as a country, as a world, we could get a whole lot more done instead of screaming at each other.
Yeah. Now the book is Sustainable Excellence, that came out in October of this last year. How long had that been in the works? And I guess, why did you decide to write that book? I mean, is it because of the pandemic, because you couldn't be out as a motivational speaker, or what?
Now, actually, it's funny because I literally wrote that book so I had my leg amputated in April of 2020. I started chemotherapy for the tumors in my lungs in June of 2020. And I wrote that book in that 3-month time span.
Wow.
And yeah, I mean, people are like, no, you should have been eating bonbons and watching Netflix and healing. I'm like, no, I want to write this book. And the book was really born out of 2 conversations I had. One was with I used to be a high school basketball coach when we lived in Texas. And I had one of my players that had moved to Colorado, where my wife and I live, and we'd had dinner with her. And I said to her one night, I said, I'm really excited that you're living close and we can watch you find and live your purpose. And she got real quiet for a while, and she was like, well, Coach, what do you think my purpose is? I said, I have no idea what your purpose is, but that's what your life should be about, finding that purpose and then living it. And then I had the other conversation was with a young man in college who reached out to me and wanted to know what I thought were the most important things he should learn to not only be successful in business or his job, but in life. And I didn't want to give him the, get up early, work hard, help others. Not that those aren't important, they are, but I wanted to try to do something deeper. And so I took some time, wrote some notes, and eventually came up with these 10 principles and I sent them to him. And then I sort of stepped back and I was like, well, I've got a life story that emulates this principle, or I know somebody whose life emulates that principle. So during that time period, I took those 10 principles and I literally sat down at the computer and wrote stories underneath the principles. And that's kind of how the book happened.
Wow. That's awesome. What's one story that you really it really hits home to you in this book? And then I want to ask you about when you do motivational speaking, but in this book, what's one that really hits home to you?
Well, one of the principles that the one that resonates with me, and it's funny because as I do these, people see the principles and they're like, well, this one resonates with me or that one resonates, and so it's really kind of interesting. But the one really that I think resonates with me is because I'm so guilty of it. And it's the second one. And again, the principles are not in any order in the book. So, and it's most people think with their fears and their insecurities instead of using their minds. I know I've done it a bunch in my life. I want to do this, but I'm scared or I'm worried what other people will think about me or something like that. So I don't do it. And it was just something that I really felt was important. There's always something in my life that was like, this is important. I learned something from this. Like the listening part of it. I learned something being a negotiator. I learned how to listen to understand instead of listen to respond. So that was just something that I felt was important for all of us to learn, because I know we've all done it. We've all said, oh no, I'm not gonna, that scares me, or I'm afraid of what people will say if I fail at this, and so I don't do it. But especially with young people, whenever I talk to young people, I always tell them, if you've got a passion in your heart, if there's something that's burning that you want to do and it scares you, then you should do it. Yeah. Because at the end of your life, the things that you're going to regret are not going to be the things that you did. They're going to be the things that you didn't do. And by then it's going to be too late to do them.
Yeah, an example of, I said this on a previous podcast with somebody about listening. Early on in my reporting career, I had the habit of not listening. I was more worried about getting what they said down, looking at my notebook, not looking at them, asking my question, because that was the most important. Not the breaking news that they might have said, I just didn't hear. But I've transformed the way I've reported by making sure that, one, I record conversations more often now, so I can pay attention and focus. And if I miss something, I have it there. But I can actually be actively listening. So that's something that I had to learn the hard way a few times.
I understand. And that's just it. You learn, it was something that crystallized in your mind because something happened and you learned the hard way. And now it's stuck with you forever. And that's a good thing.
Yeah. So how do you do your motivational speaking? What is a Terry Tucker motivational speech event like?
Dancing girls, pom-poms, cheerleaders, things like that. It's been so long since I've done one. It really kind of depends on the audience. Yeah. I like talking to younger people. Mm-hmm. I honestly think the book is geared more toward younger people, but then I had an 87-year-old man who bought it, read it, and then got in contact with me and said, if I would have had these principles when I was younger, I would have, I would have had a better life. So I
could have been a contender.
Yeah, but I mean, it really depends on the audience, and I try to feed off the audience. I don't make any pretense that I have all the answers to all this stuff. I don't have an S on my chest. I don't wear a cape, but I just tell my story and kind of just go from there in terms of what that story has taught me, what I have learned, and hopefully people can take something from that it'll resonate with them and they can take something away with it. I mean, it's, I'm not Billy Graham or anything like that. I don't command that kind of audience, but I just tell my story because I think it's, it's kind of the old Winston Churchill quote, when you're going through hell, keep going. That's kind of what I feel like I'm doing. I've whatever time I've got left, I should be dead by now. I looked at my scans from June of 2020. Couple months ago, my doctor finally showed them to me, and I looked at him like, how was I alive? He's like, I have no idea. But obviously the big guy's not done with me yet. So
Okay.
I'm going to keep doing this as long as he wants me to do it.
Well, in the message that you sent to me, and I'm sorry, I'm looking back and forth.
No,
I
that's
got
fine.
screens all over the place that with notes and comments that I want to make sure. But you had said that you refused to be a victim of this malignancy, and you vowed to continue your fight. And then you talk about, in addition to your faith, you have 4 truths to guide the decision that you make in your life. Can you talk about those truths?
Sure. So there used to be 3. Now there's 4 because I have plenty of time to sit around and think about this stuff. So the first one is something I learned actually when I was young. I had 3 knee surgeries in high school and still was able to play Division I college basketball. And the first one is you need to control your mind or it will control you. And I remember when I had those surgeries, I had, my brain was kind of like, you're a step slower. You're probably not as good as you used to be. And, coaches aren't going to want to recruit you and things like that. And I mean, I was recruited by Coach K when he was at Army. I had Joe B. Hall, who just won the national championship. I mean, I was still playing at an elite level and still being recruited. So I learned that I had to flip that switch. And I quickly realized, our minds can hold one thought at a time. Why would you make that a negative thought?
Yeah.
Why would people?
Yeah, a lot of people call that imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. So that was the first one. The second one is we need to embrace the pain and the suffering that we all experience in life and use it to make you a stronger and more determined individual. And I wish I knew how to, I could bottle this or write a book about it, and because I'd be living on an island in Jamaica somewhere if I could. But I've just had so much pain in my life. And we know that our brains are hardwired to avoid that. We avoid pain and we seek pleasure. So most people run from it. I've just gotten to the point where I just take it. And the more pain I'm in, the stronger that I get, the stronger that I feel, the more determined that I feel. So I use it as energy, or I burn it as fuel just to make me stronger. So that's number 2. And then number 3 is the one I've recently added because I think it's important to kind of look at the end game, to kind of think of, what are people going to say about you at your funeral? Will your ancestors, and we're not in a culture, I do a lot of podcasts in the UK and things like that. And where people's ancestors, it's important to them. I mean, I don't think in America our ancestors are, but would your ancestors be proud of the life that you've lived? And so number 3 is this: what we leave behind is what we weave in the hearts of other people. Wow. And I think that's real powerful. And then number 4 is pretty self-explanatory. It's as long as you don't quit, you can never be defeated. So those are
that Jimmy V mentality there.
Yeah, it really is. You just have to keep going. And I recently had, I'm on a clinical trial drug that kind of beats me up. And I had a nurse come to me and she was like, Terry, this thing's kicking your butt. Nobody would think anything less of you if you quit, if you got off of this. And I tried to explain the 4 truths to her. I didn't get through to her. I mean, I don't think she was ready to hear anything like that. But I told her, I said, my doctor may take me off this drug or I may die on this drug, but I will never quit this drug because 1, it's helping me. And 2, I'm just not wired to quit things like that.
Well, I don't think that speaks with a lot of athletes, too. I mean, you were raised that way. I wrestled and played football in high school and wrestled in college until I blew my knee out. But that was my mentality. I still don't have that of wanting to quit. I've spent 10 years working on the book. I still haven't given up. It's taken a lot of twists and turns and evolved and changed, and I've paused, but I've never given up on it. And I'm seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. But I think that's a mentality that a lot of athletes and former athletes have.
Yeah, I think so. It's just, I think you get hardwired to know that, you can't quit. And you look at athletics and you think, that's a team sport where you're part of something that's bigger than you. If you don't do your job, you let not just you down, but you let your team down, you let your coaches down, you let your buddies down and stuff like that. And if you think about it, I mean, the biggest, the greatest team game that we all play is the game of life. And I just don't want to I've never wanted to let people down. I always wanted to say, I gave it all. I'll quit when I'm done, not when I'm finished.
Yeah. So what does motivational check mean to you?
So motivational check actually came from the Cincinnati Police Department when we had this unbelievably great defensive tactics instructor, and he did such. I'll give you an example of some of the things he did. He would have us bring a photograph of the people that we love the most to class, and as we learned different techniques to defend ourselves, we were to look at those people, because he reasoned that you'll fight harder for the people you love than you'll fight for yourself. And he wanted you to realize that at 3 o'clock in the morning, when you get a drunk run and that drunk pulls out a knife and stuff like that, that there's somebody else involved in this. There's your wife or your husband or your kids or your mom. There's somebody else. You're bigger. This is bigger than just you. So motivational check was something that he instilled in us. And when we were doing things, and he kicked we ran a marathon. We did all kinds of stuff. I'm 37 years old. I'm running a marathon, on a bad knee on top of it. And he said, anytime anybody's got, you're done, you just don't think you can go on, just yell out motivational check. Mm-hmm. And the rest of us would respond with our class number. We were the 84th recruit class, just to let the person know, hey, you're not alone. We're in this with you. We're hurting too. Just hang in there, kind of thing. So when I was looking for a title for my website, that's kind of how motivational check came about.
That's awesome. Now, going back to this illness, now, you said that you probably shouldn't be living, or at least from the doctor's charts. What does that mean to you, knowing that? You said that you don't think God's finished with you, or you still have something, a higher purpose. Is there what is that higher purpose? Do you know that? Do you have a crystal ball?
Yes, I do, right here. No. And that's a great question. When I found out that I was going to have my leg amputated, or actually after I had my leg amputated and I had these tumors, I went to the mortuary, I went to the cemetery, I went to the church, and I planned my funeral. And, I had a lot of people, not a lot of people, but I had people that were like, that's kind of defeatist, isn't it? And I was like, well, last time I checked, we're all going to die. I don't think anybody's working on a cure for life right now or anything like that. Yeah. So, I'm like, no, I think that's a gift that I can give my family. So, whatever happens, and again, I am not afraid to die. And again, I'm probably going to have every psychologist in Colorado, if they hear this, at my door. I'm almost excited to see what's on the other side of this life, because I feel I found the purpose that God put me on this earth to do, and I lived that purpose. And now he's got me doing this other thing for as long as he wants me to do it. And then when that's over, I'm sure it'll be time to go. And when that is, it's okay. It's okay to die. We're all going to die, but we're not all going to really live. And I really feel that I have really lived a very powerful, very fun, very exciting kind of life. So death doesn't scare me that much.
So how rare is this cancer? You say it's a rare cancer. It's what? I can't even pronounce it.
Yeah, don't even try.
Yeah, ALM. And I'll put it in the show notes and all that, since I can't pronounce it. I can't pronounce a lot of things.
But you're a writer.
I'm a writer. I don't have to be able to pronounce. But how rare is this cancer?
It's pretty rare. It's a form of melanoma, and most people know melanoma as a skin disease. You're out in the sun or something like that. But this is a rarer form. There are about 6,500 people in the United States, last time I checked, that get this form of cancer every year. So it's very, very small. And it's a form of melanoma that appears on the bottom of your feet or the palms of your hands or in the nail beds, underneath your fingernails or your toenails. Although I heard recently they're about ready to take the nail bed cancer form of melanoma and make it its own special form. And then there's even a rarer form that appears in your mucous membranes, so in your nose or your mouth or your anus or something like that, but it's still melanoma. Yeah. And the weird thing about mine is, a couple summers ago, I had all 88 genes that doctors either know or suspect cause all kinds of cancer. I had them all tested. I have no mutations in any of my genes. So that begs the question, why did this happen? And my doctor's like, I don't know. And in all honesty, I don't spend a lot of time worrying about why it happened. It happened. These are my cards. I've got to play them. It doesn't really do me any good to be like, well, why did this happen to me? Who cares? It happened. Deal with it.
Yeah. You may not have a 7-2 starting hand, but it's probably two number cards, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
I think World Series of Poker, somebody won the World Series on a pair of deuces. So
hey, there you go. Sometimes you got to bluff, right?
Yeah. So, what is your favorite motivational speech that you give? What's something that what's in your go-to bag of speeches when you talk to people? I mean, I know it's geared to your audience, but what's something that's your favorite?
I think my favorite is to talk to kids about, especially I'm involved with a woman here who takes people into schools and talks to young people about bullying and things like that. So I like to talk to kids about the importance of, believing in yourself. And I'm 60 years old. I get it. I get that, 9, 10, 12, 14, 15-year-old kids, they want to be part of the group. They don't want to be set aside. At 60, I'm like, I don't care about the group. I want to be, kind of on my own. But that's the thing, as a policeman, you'd probably get taken off podcasting if I told you all the names that I've been called as a cop. But those things only resonate. Those things only matter if I own them. If you told me that, and I did. When I was 13 years old, I was 6'5". I had a size 14 shoe, a real skinny foot, and my ears were huge. They looked like Dumbo. And, my head had not caught up with the rest of, with my ears.
Yeah.
And I was uncoordinated. I was, and people made fun of me all the time. But my focus was basketball. I put all of my energy into that and into something positive. And then I kind of look back in college and I'm like, okay, look where I am now. And look where all you people who tease me are now, and that kind of thing. So I like to try to get to, especially since I've heard things about kids that, girls don't like their bodies and boys are, I'm intimidated by you because you're a football player, you're a wrestler and stuff like that. So I'm intimidated and stuff like that. Why do you care what other people think? I mean, that's a rhetorical question because I know when you're that age, you do care. But in all honesty, why would you can always tell something about a person by the 5 people that they hang around with. You can always tell, what kind of people, you don't even have to know them. Tell me the 5 people you hang around with and I'll tell you what kind of person you are. So if people are constantly in your face about you're ugly or your ears are big or your feet are big or you're uncoordinated, why would you even hang around those? Why would you have anything to do with them? Why wouldn't you get a group of people that supported you and do stuff like that? So that's kind of what I love trying to get that message out, especially to young people, because it just drives me nuts when they're, they go, and especially with social media, you'll call me a name on social media that you would never call me to my face. Yeah. So it's like, what do you care? Who cares what they call you? Yeah. Forget about that. Do something productive.
Yeah. And it takes a lot of us years or decades to learn that. So it took me a while because I had a thin skin for a while. now it's pretty thick.
Hey, you're a reporter. It has to be.
I know.
Right?
I had to grow a thick skin. Take me back to the Citadel. What was that like playing for a military academy and a Division I school?
It was one of the, until I got cancer, it was probably the hardest thing that I ever did. I mean, when I went to the Citadel, it was an all-male military school. It was, I mean, the hazing, I remember they put it, it's Charleston, South Carolina in August. So, it's 900 degrees and it's 99% humidity. And I remember they took us all and they put us in the shower and they turned on all the hot water and they said, you're staying here until somebody passes out.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, wait a minute, I came here to play basketball. Excuse me, I don't belong here, kind of thing. So I was so in over my head. I was going to quit. I remember I was walking over to the field house to tell the coaches I was going to quit. And I said, you know what, first I'll stop and see if I got any mail. Well, I did. I had a 7-page handwritten letter from my father, who had never, ever written me a letter, basically saying, pull your head out of your butt. You have a full scholarship for 4 years to get a college education, and you've called home 7 times since you've been there, and not once have you asked about anybody who's here. You are so in your head right now that you need to get out. And once I did that, it was an incredible experience. I played for a coach by the name of Les Robinson, who is the only coach in the history of college athletics to be both a head basketball coach and an athletic director at 3 Division I schools. He actually took over for Valvano when Valvano got in trouble at North Carolina State. He was an NC State grad. And one of my biggest, I got to play against some great people, and you'll love this story. So they used to have what they called the North-South doubleheader, and they played it at the Charlotte Coliseum. So they took 2 teams from North Carolina, who just happened to be North Carolina and North Carolina State. And they took 2 teams from South Carolina, who just happened to be the Citadel and Furman. And they would play, we were both Citadel and Furman in the same conference, NC State and NC are in the same conference. So we would play back to back, Friday night, Saturday night.
Yeah.
So this was 1982, Michael Jordan's freshman year. North Carolina State wins the national championship. The very next night, Saturday night, I play against Valvano and, Wittenberg and all those guys who in 1983 win the national championship. Mm-hmm. So in one weekend, I had the ability to play against 2 national championship teams, not to mention Michael Jordan, and then fast forward that, say 20 years. My youngest brother, the one who pitched for Notre Dame, was a basketball coach at Loyola Academy in Chicago. He coached Michael Jordan's 2 sons. Okay. And he's at practice one day and he's going over a play and he looks up and he's like, nobody's paying attention to anything that he's saying. So he looks where they're looking, and Jordan had come into the gym, not as a play, just as a parent. I'm here to pick up my kids after practice. So my brother looks at him and says, hey, Michael, you're a little bit of a distraction. Would you mind stepping out in the hall until practice is over? Jordan and his wife were super people. They're like, sure, coach, no problem. I'm really sorry. My brother thought later, he's like, I'm probably the only coach in the history of basketball that ever kicked Michael Jordan out of practice.
That's funny. So did you go up against him? Did you guard him, or were you one-on-one with him, or?
No, I never guarded him. I can just say we played against North Carolina. I never guarded. I guarded him. I held him scoreless for 20 minutes.
More like 20 seconds, right?
Yeah, exactly. The funny thing about that game, we were winning at halftime.
You got something on that, yeah.
And it's like, hey, if the game was only 20 minutes long, we'd be in great shape.
Small victories, right?
Right.
What's one thing you want to tell? Because I think we're getting close to the end of the time here. But what's something that you want to make sure to emphasize to people? What's something that whenever you meet someone, what's the one piece of advice or one suggestion or one motivation you give people?
So I'll leave you with this story. I've always been a big fan of Westerns growing up. And my mom and dad, used to let me stay up and watch Wild Wild West and Gunsmoke and all that kind of stuff. 1993, I believe, the movie Tombstone came out with Val Kilmer as John Doc Holliday and Kurt Russell's Wyatt Earp. Now, Wyatt Earp and John Doc Holliday were 2 living, breathing human beings who walked on the face of the earth. They are not made-up characters for the movie. And if you think about it, they called him Doc because he was a dentist by trade, but he was pretty much a gunslinger and a card shark. And Wyatt was a lawman, had been a lawman his entire life, yet these 2 men from entirely divergent backgrounds formed this great friendship. And at the end of the movie, Doc is dying at a sanitarium in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, literally about 3 hours from my house. And the real Doc Holliday died there. He's buried in the Glenwood Springs Cemetery. and they're talking about what they want out of life. And Wyatt at this point in his life is destitute. He has no money, has no job, he has no prospects for a job. So every day he comes to play cards with Doc to pass the time. And I don't think this really happened in the movie. It looks good, but in real life, I believe Wyatt found out about Doc's death like 2 months after he died. But I think it's important, this scene, because they're talking about what they want out of life. And Doc says, I was in love with my cousin when I was young, and she joined a convent over the affair, but she's all I ever wanted. And Doc looks at Wyatt and says, what about you, Wyatt? What do you want? And Wyatt says, I just want to lead a normal life. And Doc looks at him and says, there's no normal, there's just life, and get on with living yours. I see so many people that are waiting for, if this happens, then I'll have a normal life. If that happens, then I'll be successful. If this happens, then I'll be the talk of the town, whatever it is. Don't wait on life. Don't wait for life to come to you. Go out, find your purpose in life, live it, because at the end of your life, you'll be a whole lot happier and a whole lot more at peace.
Man, that got me rejuvenated there. That got me going. I'm ready to go out and face the world now. All right, Terry Tucker, I will make sure to link your book, your website, all the stuff that people need to know to find out more about you and how to get motivated and get jazzed up like you just made me. We'll have all that linked in the show notes. But Terry Tucker, thank you very much for being on here, and maybe we'll have you on here again to get maybe an update on how you're doing.
Mike, that would be great. And I just want to say thank you to you, because it's people like you that give people like me a forum. And I think between the two of us, we're going to make a difference in somebody's life.
That's all that matters, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. You have a good day.
Thank you. You take care.